As a reminder, we record these meetings for our members to access later if they are unable to attend the meeting. We don't post the recordings publicly, but we do post our notes on a regular basis. I want to also let you know that we have the automated closed captioning turned on for this session. You can turn it on along the bottom bar of your Zoom using the live transcript. And we also have an ASL interpreter here. Thank you, Erin, for being here. Thanks to the Office for the Disabled for bringing this interpreter here. If you ever need any other accommodations to attend or participate in our meetings, please send me an email. I think you likely all have my email address, but I'll put it in the chat after we get set up. So as a reminder, the Community Mobility Committee is a place for residents and interested individuals to advocate for and learn about mobility and transportation issues in the city of St. Louis. I want to remind us all to be respectful and considerate in our conversations and questions today. We're really grateful to have so much support from the staff at the city and from other folks around the region. We're going to have Jen Wade talk later today. We want to encourage everyone to be really respectful of their hard work and effort and the many varying opinions that we have about transportation and mobility. The other thing I want to remind everyone about is that we want to avoid jargon and acronyms. We know that transportation is a technical field, but we have a lot of folks here for whom this is their first foray into understanding some of these pieces and advocating for it. So if you're using a technical term, please define it and ideally share a link in the chat. We want to make sure that we're also all learning and creating an inclusive space for ourselves. And then I want to also say, be mindful of time. We're going to be encouraging more follow-ups to be happening outside the CMC meetings through our notes and through other communication. And we hope this will help us stay focused and also have some robust conversation. So please use the chat. Dawn will be taking notes throughout the meeting and we'll be documenting everything you say in the chat as well. So to kick us off, I would like to make a little bit of space for our city staff representatives to say hello and introduce themselves. For those of you who are members or are visiting for the first time, if you would be willing to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your neighborhood, and if you represent an organization, please go ahead and put that in the chat. And then I'm going to ask Taylor, my vice chair, to kick off the introductions and then have our city staff introduce themselves.
Thanks, Liz. I'm Taylor March, resident in the Carondelet neighborhood, and also work for TrailNet here in St. Louis, which helps advocate for people walking, biking, and using transit. And I'm the vice chair of the CMC. And I will pass it over to Scott Ogilvie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Ogilvie, City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency Program Manager for Complete Streets. And doing a quick scan, and I don't see any other city staff at the moment.
Andrew Lackey also.
Oh, Andrew.
So I'm Andrew Lackey, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Office on the Disabled for the City of St. Louis. And I don't see anyone else from the city right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Andrew and Scott, both so much for being here. And we will be following up with the rest of our city staff representatives. So I am going to put into the chat the meeting minutes from last month. And they've been sent out via email to the members and people on our email list, but I want to put those in there to see if there are any comments or any changes before we submit those as our final minutes. Any thoughts on the minutes? And thanks to everyone who's introducing themselves in the chat. We're very glad that you are here. Okay. So I'm going to move us into the rest of our agenda. I have dropped the agenda for today's meeting into the chat as well. We've already gotten through introductions, we've already gotten through minutes, and we're going to move into our next section, which is an open forum for sharing concerns. So this is a space for members and residents and other visitors to raise questions or issues about things that they've observed in the city. And we invite any member of the committee or any member of the public to share those concerns for up to 2 minutes. We're going to document those closely, and we'll follow up. So we're not seeing this as a space to necessarily answer those questions. Although if there's comments or things that we want to add, please do that in the chat so that we can make sure that we're hearing the voices of the community as we talk about this. So I want to open the floor if there are any folks who want to bring up some issues to discuss.
Well, I know we're not necessarily concerned about cars and that kind of thing, because we're trying to deal a lot with obviously other transportation items, but we do need to know when the city's going to start doing some pothole fillings and paving and that kind of stuff, because I do own a car, but I'm getting ready to lose it to several potholes pretty soon. So maybe somewhere down the line, I think they allocated some money. When does anybody know when some of that money is going to be spent to fill some of these potholes?
Kevin, I think that's a great question. And I don't know if we know that right off the top of our head. We don't have John here, but we will follow up with John and get back to you on kind of what's that timeline.
Thank you.
John, I saw that you had something you wanted to share.
I believe this might get covered later on, but my alderwoman in Gracia informed my neighborhood that the funds that the city was going to put towards the Compton Bridge repair was taken off the table and replaced with a different project. And so I would just like to hear about if the city knows how that is going to be funded and with what money, so that we don't lose the federal matching funds that the city has acquired.
So I'll take a stab at that. So back up a little bit. So the Compton Bridge, we have a very substantial grant award from East West Gateway for federal funding to replace the Compton Bridge between Shodo and essentially I-64 on the north. These federally funded projects require a local match component, generally a minimum from the local government of at least 20%. In this case, that amounts to roughly $4 million. So it's our share of the bridge reconstruction. There was, so one of the ARPA bills, which recently passed, maybe I can find the bill number real quick.
Oh, well, yeah, Lisa 79.
184, Board Bill 184 was that bill number, which allocated some of the existing ARPA funding. At one point had that local match for the Compton Bridge. In the bill, it was removed by the Board of Aldermen and that money was shifted to other corridors. So to your question, where does the money come from? There's several possibilities. So one is there's still half the ARPA money has yet to be allocated. Also earlier this month, a capital bond issue was passed by voters in the city, which authorizes an additional $50 million in funding. So it would be an eligible expense to get the funding from that capital bond issue as well. And of course, the funding, if available, could also come from like general revenue from the city. So we don't know, or at this point, I don't know, I should say, exactly where that local match will come from. But I think that there's a recognition amongst everybody that the bridge has to be replaced. It's incredibly substantial, impactful project. We have federal funding available to do 80% of the work. And so my belief is that in a future allocation, maybe sometime this year, that $4 million will be identified to fund that local match component.
Thank you, Scott. Very helpful. Patrick, I think you might have had a comment.
Yeah, so obviously, I don't know how many people know this, but we had a cyclist get killed on Manchester fairly recently. I believe it was at TAM in Manchester. And I wanted to bring up, I'm not sure where it would fit. If we could get education up and running, maybe that would be a good fit for it. But I was really extremely disappointed with the fire department's response to the media on how they handled the questions from the media. They pretty quickly threw a lot of shade towards the cyclist, whether he stopped, all those typical things in which we start victim blaming, right? So I would love to see us at some point try to address that with either some kind of a one pager that goes out or some retraining for the media, for city officials. But this is an ongoing thing that we see over and over and over again. Well, the pedestrian wasn't in a crosswalk, right? Or the cyclist may not have stopped, or they weren't wearing a helmet. And we never see that stuff go towards the driver, right? We don't know if the driver that killed Jason was speeding. We don't know if he was drinking. We don't know if he had a valid driver's license. And those are all things that are just basically throwing shade against pedestrians and cyclists in the public that really are not helping us.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing that and for raising that issue.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Liz, thanks for you beat me to the punch of putting Zondi's, I believe that's what that is, resource on crash reporting. I'm not sure if I can't remember, that was put up quite a while ago, but I think that's a good idea of repurposing that. And maybe that is a wider outreach to the people who are reporting, who are the St. Louis Police Department, Fire Department. Last year when we ran our crash report, the top circumstance for crash that we found was unknown, which is pretty unacceptable, and that we just don't know the things that happen in these crashes, or they just don't know how to cite them. So whatever needs to be done to get better reporting in the media, and then as well in reports itself, we definitely need improvement on that. And so obviously I know Zondi is now with CBN, but Liz, do you know if there was like a media outpush of that? I know she went on St. Louis Public Radio, I believe, to talk about it. I was wondering if there's any more done.
Yeah, I know, Taylor sent a letter to the reporters covering this, and they did get back to him, which is more than any reporter has ever done to me in my 2 years of complaining. So I think there's probably an opportunity to share that a little more widely, and Zondi's toolkit was really focused on reporters and not as much on police or fire responders. So I think that might be something for us to think about. Are there any other comments that folks would like to raise on any topic?
I would love to follow up on, sorry, I'm not on video. There's some model crash reporting ordinances that the group of Miracle Walks did that might be useful to send to the local authorities involved in this. So I'm happy to share that in the chat.
That would be great. Thanks, Kia. Okay, any other observations, comments? Things that people would like to raise? Okay, so our next, if we're trying to move to our next agenda item, our next agenda item may be not exactly titled correctly, but the thing that we'd like to talk about is the federal funding that's coming into the city via ARPA, and some of the new federal grant opportunities that will be available. And I think Sam, do you have some things to add about this potentially?
Yeah, we just before I get to my quick statement here, but for the ARPA funding, we did the traffic calming subcommittee. We did talk about a little bit yesterday about what the yes, I was gonna say what the acronym meant. But yeah, we did talk about it a little bit about the roads that are being discussed within the ARPA plans there. So this sounds like there's some intrigue there, but and I don't think there is anyone from the mayor's office. So I guess this question will have to be directed at Scott. But we were just wondering. I was wondering if the city is looking into through there in the chat this the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program that's coming out. City of St. Louis doesn't have a Vision Zero plan. We don't have a traffic calming, like a citywide traffic calming plan. So now with this new money, and also with this grant program, it seems like a very opportune time to redo this and look at it on a citywide level. So just wanted to throw that resource out there. Is this something that's on the city's radar?
It's about 51, 52 to
Yeah, and so Safe Streets for All, that's going to be a new program that was recently authorized, the federal infrastructure bill. So I know John and I are attending a webinar on that program next week, I believe, to learn more. So I don't think we have it's also, I believe it's going to be an annual program, like most federal transportation funding programs are. So we're definitely going to learn some more next week. I don't have a sense right now if we'll have an application this year, but I think the opportunity will be there if we don't this year, in future years, as we learn more about the program and what sort of eligible activities and expenses can be. And what types of programs the federal government's looking to fund. So we're definitely interested in seeing if there's a way to make it work locally.
Is that typically something that the streets department, or do we know if the mayor's office is aware of this, or is this something, I'm assuming this is something they need to be aware of, because as we know, pedestrian fatalities keep rising. Just even like this year, we've already had double the amount of car fatalities from January to March compared to last year. So it seems like things are getting worse before they're getting better. So just hoping that the mayor's office knows about this and knows about this funds and knows about the issues that we're facing. So
yeah, I don't know if they specifically know about this program yet, as it's a new program. I would say that stuff tends to start at the staff level and then filters up. So I would imagine at some point they will know more, probably via Board of Public Service. But yeah, I mean, I think there is, so in the budget that was just introduced, or it's not introduced yet, but the budget that estimate and apportionment, which is the city's fiscal body, approved yesterday. In this preliminary budget, which still has to go to the Board of Aldermen, there is new funding in that budget for the streets department to do some traffic calming assessments. That just happened yesterday, so I don't have a lot to say about that, and probably the streets department's better able to speak about it, but certainly that's it's kind of within the same realm, I think, as Safe Streets for All funding is likely to be.
Thanks, Scott, for answering these questions when it's slightly outside your area. We really are grateful for that. Sam, you mentioned that there was some conversation about this in your subcommittee, and then I think there's also conversation in the engagement subcommittee. And I'm curious if maybe you'd be willing to share with the broader committee a little bit of the conversations that have come up in those two groups.
Yeah, I didn't sit on the last engagement subcommittee, so I might pass the baton to Dawn after I say my thoughts. But yeah, we just talked about, obviously, if those who aren't familiar, there are some plans to repave. I can't name all of them off the top of my head. They're in the board bill, but it's streets like Grand, Union, Goodfellow, I believe. Basically, what you know is the streets that are being repaved are what we call high crash corridor streets that have a lot of pedestrian crashes on them. And so I asked Scott, what we really want to see is not just repaving, but also traffic calming measures that we can do to increase not only pedestrian safety, but vehicle safety, similar to projects that were done on National Bridge with the concrete islands, things that will drastically reduce pedestrian fatalities, crashes in all modes, really. And so we talked about, what the opportunity there is, what the opportunity for traffic calming. And it sounds like there's the plans that have been done. So there's a corridor study on Kings Highway. There might be some things introduced there. And it also sounds like there needs to be some outreach. And this is maybe where the CMC can get involved if you live in one of those areas, outreach to specific alder people along those corridors to say, hey, if you have some money that you'd like to possibly help out with, whether it's a study or even traffic calming, there seems like there should be an opportunity there. Scott also mentioned that, this is very new. I think they just decided on these streets a couple weeks ago, and so we are pretty new in this process, and there's some time to go. But that's what we talked about in the traffic calming subcommittee. Basically, again, what we just wanted to talk about is there an opportunity to do some traffic calming along those new ARPA identified roads that are going to be up for repaving. So
Yeah,
Don mentioned.
Well, if I could maybe expand on that a little bit. So within that same bill, which we already brought up, Board Bill 184, there's a couple categories. So there's specifically roadway resurfacing, and then there's also traffic calming funding identified on top of that in some of those corridors. So for Riverview and Goodfellow, there's specifically some traffic calming funds, and both those projects are already largely designed. We started with Alderman to do traffic studies in those areas, and we've already been doing, we've already done a variety of public engagement activities, particularly on Goodfellow, but we have some coming up on Riverview. I think the area that Sam also touches on is, for instance, we've got funding for resurfacing Kings Highway in the bill, but within the bill itself, it's not funding for potential configuration changes or traffic calming improvements on Kings Highway. However, we've also completed traffic studies and have recommendations for various parts of Kings Highway. And so I think if we can come up with additional funding on top of the resurfacing funding, probably through typical ward capital allocations from Alderman, then we could implement, I think, more traffic calming features on top of the resurfacing. So there are a lot of opportunities. I think some are already kind of slam dunks because the funding has been identified already, but there's some that there's probably a little more work to do.
Does the city have any kind of map showing kind of where along those corridors there are plans that will be implemented already, or is there any way for us to kind of find out where there might be gaps that we could maybe help advocate with our local aldermen to say, hey, if you could commit some more capital to this, there might be opportunities to update these roadways as a part of that repaving?
Yeah, so we can produce a map. I mean, I can't produce a map that says go advocate with your alderman for to do something different. I can produce a map that shows where the Board of Aldermen has already allocated funding towards.
So I want to raise if there were any other things that came up in the engagement subcommittee meeting that we wanted to touch on this topic. And Charles.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay. So at the engagement meeting, we talked about what type of resources are going to be available by the board bill. I don't remember the number of the board bill. It's a 71393, I think, or something like that. But what it has in there is not only, as Scott alluded to, it not just has the monies that's going to be spent in the corridors, but the increases in funding for some of the other departments. For example, the Department of Planning, I believe, has $1 million in it. I'm not sure what for. Board of Public Service, I think, has an increase in resources. So there's several departments in city government that affect CMC that also saw an increase in funding. I guess my question is, how do we, much like Taylor mentioned, how do we follow that process from start to finish? When is it going to begin? And is there more community engagement around some of that? Because as we all know, and this is a question of Scott, in 2023, the ward boundaries change. I would assume the block grant funding will change as well. So those are things that are going to have to be thought about going forward, because the ward that some of that money is in now will not exist in a year. So how do we track what's going on when you have some of these monumental changes, not only in city dollars, but state dollars coming in, and then changing aldermen, both by map and by person, and then a change in block grant funding, which will have to go along with it. Needs to keep.
I wasn't trying to go there. It was more.
Sure.
Needs to keep around.
So
Charles, when you say block grant funding, do you mean ward capital funding?
Ward capital, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, so we don't know exactly if there will be changes to ward capital. So it is possible that we just have 14 wards and each ward basically has twice the amount of ward capital they have today, right? That is one possible outcome. Another outcome is that program could change a little bit, but I think those are mostly legislative decisions. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We'll have 28 aldermen until April of next year. Then we'll have 14. We're certainly, let's say, working hard to advance projects in the meantime. And there's a lot to do right now, given that there are aldermen who are interested in kind of spending down the ward capital. And we also simultaneously have, these ARPA bills getting passed. The ARPA funding is really independent of the wards, right? So they're identifying streets and corridors. So that'll be spent. It's already authorized legislatively. So those will move forward, I think, regardless of who is representing a particular area. But you certainly bring up a lot of good questions, and we're about to be certainly in a time of transition, and I don't think I can predict exactly how it will pan out, but there could certainly be some evolution or adjustments once we have 14 aldermen.
Scott, one quick question, and this goes back to your days as an alderman. It was my understanding that ward capital is actually a charter amendment and subsequently would have to be changed by charter. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if it was a charter amendment. I think ward capital was authorized as part of a sales tax in the early 90s. So I don't know if that's actually a charter or if it was an ordinance, but I don't want to say definitively since I'm just going from memory here.
Charles, I'm sorry to cut this off. I think the word capital discussion is an important one for us to have, but I want to move us on to our next agenda item. What I've generally heard in this conversation is that there is a lot of work that planning and DPS are already thinking about in this area, and we want to be supportive, and perhaps this is an area where the CMC, the voting members of the CMC can say to the mayor's office, we would really love to see some of this work advance. And particularly some of these opportunities around safe streets for all as these funds are coming into the city. So I think we'll move that conversation offline and follow up with folks afterwards. And I want to move us on to our next topic. We are very lucky to have Jen Wade, area engineer for MODOT here. And Jen is going to talk about how MODOT operates, which I know has come up in some of our previous conversations. So I'll hand it over to Jen.
All right. Give me 1 second. I'll get everything loaded up. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you to Liz and Taylor for inviting me to speak today. I've warned them to cut me off for time because this is a topic that, with your questions and the information I'd like to share, can certainly take up as much time as we would like it to. So, or rather, as you would like it to. So, Liz and Taylor asked if I could talk a little bit about how MODOT works in the bounds of the city of St. Louis. Obviously, we are a statewide organization. We have a really unique role here in St. Louis itself. So my name is Jen Wade. I am the area engineer for MODOT, but the area that I serve is just the city of St. Louis. Most area engineers at MODOT have multiple counties that they manage. but we have so much going on here in the city that I just get the one tiny county, which is delightful for me. I grew up in the Shaw neighborhood. And so I was delighted to get the opportunity to work in this area. I just put together some images, mostly images, real basic stuff, and I'll try to run through those quickly so we can reserve some time for your questions. Overview, I put together some maps, some short information about MODOT's responsibilities in the city. I want to describe a little bit the city-state collaboration that we have in place, talk about funding, and then get to your questions. All right. So first, what is MODOT owned? What do we do here in the city of St. Louis? The quick overview for that is if a route has a number or a letter, that means it's state managed, okay? So the easy ones in the city is what MODOT actually owns is shown here in blue. It's really just the interstates. Now I'm giving the big picture view. We do have little extras other than this, but this is really what we own in blue. I-70, I-64, which nobody calls it that, it's Highway 40, 44 and 55. That's it that we own in the city. It includes river bridges too. What else does MODOT participate in? Now these in pink are city-owned routes, but as you'll see, they all have a number or a letter in their name. And that means that the city owns it, but MODOT's participating to help manage this. So these are maintained by MODOT. I won't read them all out. One of the ones you might be familiar with is MLK or Missouri 180. That used to be maintained by MODOT, but was recently handed back to the city for city maintenance. Okay, what does MODOT maintain? So if it's a city-owned route that MODOT maintains, what does that mean? And our maintenance agreement with the city is that we really are trying to manage the what we call curb to curb or the driving surface. So I've got circles that pop up here. So we manage the surface, driving surface, meaning pavement on our routes. This image is at Grand and Gravois. So Gravois is a MODOT managed route or MODOT maintained route. We also take care of striping, which includes crosswalks or long lines and signals on our route. This isn't, again, there's so many details. Each route, I'm giving big picture. So on this route and most of them, we manage the signals. Here's another picture because I couldn't get it all in one. We maintain the stripes on the roadway, signage along the roadway, not all signage, but guide signs, anything to do with how to drive is us. This is a picture of street sweeping. MODOT does provide street sweeping on our maintenance routes, but we are not the exclusive sweeper because our state pattern of sweeping is much less frequent than a city expectation level, if that makes sense. So if you think about all the routes across the entire state, most of them are not being swept on a monthly basis, and ours is less frequent than that in general. So we participate in sweeping, but we're not the exclusive agency for that. Okay, so this is now onto what MODOT does not maintain. So we do not maintain lighting along these MODOT maintained routes. This picture is a little bit funny because the parking meters were removed here, but we do not maintain any parking. So all the parking rules along these routes are also managed by the city. And the big one, and the big one for you guys and for all of our partners to understand, is that MODOT is not responsible for anything that's outside of those curbs. So the big one there is sidewalks. So we don't repair sidewalks. We are not responsible for them. We do consider sidewalks to be an important part of the travel way and corridors that we own. We just don't own these routes. So the city maintains responsibility for those. One more that's not in this picture is we also do not manage access rights on our maintenance corridors. So that would be where people decide to put a driveway in. That all gets permitted through the city, not through MODOT. If you guys have questions as I'm going through this, feel free to throw them in the chat. And I'll make sure to address those. So next topic is collaboration. If we have that network of roads crisscrossing right through city property, if we're maintaining roads that belong to the city, how do we work together? And I would say the most official thing that we have set up is every couple of months, we have what we call a city-state meeting. The state runs through all the projects we have coming up, and we look out a few years and try to communicate to the city what we have coming, what touches up against, which projects the city needs to look at so that we can do our work. There's so much coordination that needs to happen as we look to the future projects. That's really what this meeting's about. And the city does the same. They go through the projects they have funded or looking to fund in the coming years. We look also at a construction level, where we are with different projects, how close we are to completion, what interactions we have between them. That's a really important meeting. And then we always come out with lots of questions and things that usually I need to take care of between one meeting to the next. But so that's like our sort of official standing meeting. As we talk about those projects, I also wanted to put in here, we have cost apportionment agreements. It's a big word, but Scott Ogilvy just mentioned Riverview work. This is an example of a route where MODOT is going to be paving the road and doing the striping as we are expected to do through our maintenance agreement. And the Alder people wanted to put funding on this route for safety enhancements. And so we are going to be in an agreement with the city so that the Alder people can put their ward capital into this project and pay for the upgrades to the route that they are interested in. We will help with that. And in this case, we get to do a little bit of design work. We're going to roll that construction dollars into our project and do the implementation. So we are taking on a little bit extra responsibility there, but it just makes sense to deliver that for the community at the same time. Cost share. Yes.
We have two questions in the chat.
Yes.
Becca would like to know, how do you manage the bike lanes? And then Andrew would like to know, what about the curb ramps on MODOT maintained roads?
The curb ramps. Okay, so all sidewalk facilities, including ramps, belong to the city to manage. Now, we have the only exception to that is MODOT likes to make it right. So when we have a signal that we're managing, we make sure all those ramps comply with ADA rules, especially because that has to do with our push buttons and things like that. So we really aren't responsible for even those, but we go ahead and do a little extra when we can to make sure the ramps right at our signal facilities make sense. But any of the other ramps that are on sidewalks are all the responsibility of the cities. That is one of the things we can accept city funding in a cost apportionment agreement to do sometimes as we're doing our paving work.
And then the other question was about bike lanes.
About bike lanes. Yes. Okay. Those, I would say, those are very much led by the city, but those are group decisions made between city and state officials, I would say. Usually the city itself is requesting a particular layout or cross-section for those, but MODOT also has come to the table and said, hey, we think this corridor should have bike lanes here or should have a road diet here. There are, we don't get to change where that curb line is. We don't manage any of the medians, but we have installed those medians so that the city can then maintain them. Natural Bridge is the project, that MODOT put a lot of safety funds into and did more than is required during a maintenance agreement, because it was an area that we all identified really needed some attention to help with safety on that corridor at the time. Does that answer the question about bike lanes?
Yes, we have a couple of other kind of related questions. Are you willing to answer them now? Okay. So does MODOT have to sign off on traffic calming proposals on the roads that you help maintain?
Yes. So MODOT is going to naturally have responsibilities for safety along corridors that they maintain. And so it's really important that we get to say what goes on to the corridors. That's right. So we do have a say in that. I'll let you know too that this MODOT maintenance agreement is, on some level, it's a political document that was set in place a long time ago. And so MODOT is very cautious about participating in these maintenance agreements. And if there's stuff that we start to perceive as being unsafe conditions for the roadway, it is an agreement that we can back out at any time. No, I don't want that. The city doesn't want that. And so we try to work really close together to make sure that our agency is comfortable with things that are being implemented on the roadway. I think a really common example of this is the large concrete shapes that sometimes the city likes to use to help with traffic calming. That's something that MODOT does not allow on our MODOT maintained routes. So the big shamo pots or the geodesic shapes, those things are not crash worthy. And so we don't allow those on the routes we maintain.
Great, thank you. The next question is back to bike lanes. How do we get bike lane markings repainted on MODOT roads?
How do you get them repainted?
Yes.
I should have put this on my last slide. We have a phone number and you can call us and ask. So I'm going to type it in here. 275-1500. That's our local number, and ask 888 ask MODOT. Both of these phone numbers that I just put in the chat get you to the same place. It is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year customer service hotline. It is answered by humans. It is routed to the correct department. It is tracked and accountable. So if something is faded and needs to be repainted, letting our group know about it is the best way to do that. If you would like additional things that are not there, that eventually will get routed to me or to a future project. It's not something that gets fixed right away if it's not something that was there before, but it is something that gets to the right person and gets addressed. And you can get a call back if you leave your information with them.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Is the curb to curb model typical, or is it shared by other states in their maintenance agreements?
Ooh. No, I don't think it's typical at all. It's very confusing to basically everyone in the state. I am not sure about other states. Like I said, that maintenance agreement was designed at a political level for people who are interested in seeing more state investment in the urban area. So it was done by legislators who were saying, hey, if MODOT's got a role here, they should at least make sure these travelways are safe. If you look at what routes, I'll back up a little bit on this map. If you look at what routes we have, they tend to be extensions of MODOT's MODOT-owned routes that are in the county. So we do own Route D, Page Avenue, in the county. And so we just don't own it in the city. So that's what we selected as one of the routes to continue maintaining through the city. But no, it's really atypical. And in fact, oh dear. Our funding in the St. Louis, in the 5-county St. Louis district is impacted by the fact that we have to maintain these city routes, and we actually don't get our fair allocation of resources from the state in general because we don't own these routes. So it actually pulls funding away from the other MODOT owned routes in our district in order to be able to take care of this maintenance work. So it's really atypical.
Scott?
Oh, Scott, you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to say something kind of similar to what you just said, and that there was a period where there was no maintenance agreement between MODOT and the city. And so MODOT wasn't doing any work on those surface streets until that maintenance agreement came into being, which I think was 2004, if I remember correctly. And it's sort of the city had already constructed those streets and owned the streets probably prior to MODOT's existence in most cases. So we own the right of way. MODOT came in and built highways, which they owned and maintained, but it was recognized at some point that, hey, shouldn't they be maintaining some surface streets in some comparable fashion to what they do across the state? And so that was what that maintenance agreement is probably represents a compromise where MODOT would do more than 0, which they had been doing, but less than 100%, which maybe they had resistance to. So we have it is sort of an unusual shared jurisdiction model.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for some of that historical background. So we have a couple of other questions in the chat, but Jen, we only have a few more minutes left with you. So I also want to give you just a little bit of chance to cover some of your other topics, and we'll come back to those questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. I can try to rush through these a little bit. The last point on this slide I want to make is relationships. Obviously, when we collaborate with the city, the better we get to know the city staff, managers, etc., all the better. So I get to work with Scott Ogilvy on the regular, and it's a delight as always. Here are resources. I wanted to connect you all to information about how MODOT gets and spends its money. I will just drop all 3 of the links I'm going to share into the chat right now all at once. Ooh, I hope that works out.
I'll get the links while you tell us the things.
Thank you. The big picture on this slide. Okay, first of all, the Citizens Guide to Transportation Funding in Missouri is available on our website. It is very well written and clear. It is a complex topic, but if you want to know, we are trying to let the public know how we are funded and what we do with the money. Most of MODOT's funding only comes from user fees like your license plate fees and fuel tax. We also get federal revenue. That's a huge part of our funding. And only very recently, we started getting a tiny bit of Missouri general revenue, which is way unusual. So most of the funding that you get is not taxed through your property or your sales tax. It's just gas tax and your other car user fees. It goes to pay a lot of different things, but we'll go on. Please go to that link if you have questions about those details. We also, on our website, talk about our 5-year plan. We look ahead for 5 years, plan out what projects we're going to be doing. We call this document the STIP, which is the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. It is a big planning effort every year, but I have a clip of what we have, an interactive map where you can look at what years things are coming up. You can look for bridges, you can look for roads. That link is really helpful. Scroll down and you'll find this map on the very first page. And that way you can know what's coming up in your area for MODOT. Asset management. This is possibly my favorite thing about how MODOT manages our work, is we look ahead and say, okay, how often do we need to pave these roads? And we just tick through them. We have quantified how much money this costs to maintain our existing system every year. We make sure to allocate that much funding every year to maintain what we have. We've been told by our voters over and over again, this is our priority, rather than building new or getting bigger or expanding or doing a lot of economic development work. Our voters have said, maintain the system that we have. That's your basic priority. And so we do a great job of knowing how much it costs to do that, planning ahead so that pavement doesn't degrade too far, and getting those projects on the books. Liz and Taylor asked me specifically to address what we have published as unfunded needs. Again, great link to our website that shares all the details that I have merely clipped out and included on this slide, but you can look through all the projects we have on our unfunded needs list. Now, these projects are above and beyond, or they are large asset management projects that are not yet in our STIP. We do not yet have funding for these projects. And it's a way to communicate to our voters and our elected officials what projects we would like to do if we had more funding. So typically when we write an unfunded needs list, it's because there is a potential for having funding, a different funding source in the future. And we can share with our legislative officials or representatives and say, hey, if we want these projects, this is what will be next if you've got X number of dollars coming to the state for a roadway. This year, the federal government asked us to include not just road and bridge needs, but a multimodal needs list. That is not something that MODOT usually manages. We've worked with our partners to collect a list of multimodal needs that we would invest in, or that our partners would invest in if the funding became available. Really exciting stuff. Please go look at it. This is my shameless plug because I saw where some of you all live. I just want to let you know that that MODOT is going to be investing in maintaining the I-64 corridor between Kings Highway and Jefferson coming up soon. Before we invest a whole bunch of money in maintaining it, we thought, you know what, we should check to make sure people actually like what we have before we make sure to keep what we have for the next 50 to 60 years. So we're in a process right now. It's really exciting. It's a study, it's a type of study called Pell. We've branded it Future 64. And what we're trying to do is look at all these spaghetti ramps that we have all over the place and say, do we still want this? If we're considering moving ramps around, it's going to have a lot of impacts to the community, businesses, but also people traveling across the corridor, people on bikes, pedestrians, etc. So this is the year, 2022, is time for us to hear from you guys about what your values are here, what the problems you see with the corridor are, what opportunities you'd like us to take advantage of. We're working with the city, with Bi-State, with GRG, with TrailNet, I hope, and lots of partners to talk about what this could and should be as we make our next plan for projects coming up. So our first community engagement presentation, public meeting will be mid-May. So within a few weeks, I think today we're going to have a press release going out about it. So keep an eye out for that.
Great, thank you, Jen. We have a number of questions still left, but we've only got about 6 minutes left in our meeting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these questions and then ask Jen if she is willing to give us some written responses, or I'll call her on the phone and we'll get these documented in the notes and get the answers back. And so the first question is, can someone explain the advantages of who owns what pieces of road? So we'll do a follow-up on that one. We might have to engage the planning department about that as well. Then we have a question about if MODOT has dedicated positions that are looking at researching and implementing road safety measures for pedestrians, cyclists, and other vulnerable road users. So we'll do another follow-up on that and who those folks are. And then Kaylina is saying she's had trouble reporting issues to MODOT in the city of St. Louis on these routes when issues like street sweeping, bike lane striping, clogged sewer drainage, trees growing in the sidewalks, for example. And she understands why this is complex with the different people maintaining things. But she's curious about how that's supposed to look for the average citizen who's not willing to call multiple customer support lines to report maintenance issues. So I think we'll also follow up about what's that process when there's multiple entities that are responding to a question. Jen, I want to give you just 1 minute if you have any sort of final things, and hopefully I got all of the questions out of the chat. And I think Jen has been very willing to respond to our questions. So if other questions come up, please let us know, and we will definitely make sure that we ask Jen. Jen, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I do want to, among those questions, they're also good and juicy. I want to answer them all, but I would just say to Aubrey's question about do we have dedicated positions? Yes, we have a traffic department that manages basically the operational experience, and they have safety specialists that focus on where our safety dollars should be spent. MODOT is responsible for spending a certain number of safety dollars every year because I won't go into that because it's important. And I think we can always do better. So I personally feel like safety is it's in our values. It's very important to MODOT. As the owners of interstates across the whole state of Missouri, you can imagine that fatalities is a big deal to us. We really, as the owners of so many of the state's highways where fatalities happen, I have to tell you that it's very personal to hear about those. And our traffic department is reading crash reports and analyzing those on a regular basis to see what we can do better. And I think groups like this can always encourage us and push our organizations as big as MODOT to continue remembering and keeping that on our forefront. But it's something I and we care about quite a bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much for your time and for being here. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. And so I want to get us to our sort of final bit here. We're going to do some subcommittee updates. Oops, sorry. In order to compress our time, I'm going to just say as an overview, the engagement committee meets every third Wednesday. You can contact Dawn and Charles about that. And the Open Streets and Parklets Committee meets every second Wednesday, and you can contact Sam about that and what they're working on. They've got some things going on to hopefully move us towards Parking Day in the fall. And I want to hand it over to Kevin Hahn Petruso, who's the chair of the Traffic Calming Subcommittee, to give a little update.
Cool. Thanks, Liz, and thank you everyone for the call this afternoon. I wanted to share briefly. So the Traffic Calming Committee, we're focusing on putting together a traffic calming guide for city residents, community groups, and local electeds to help guide decision making in installing traffic calming on a neighborhood level. So that work is ongoing, but I did want to share that this, fortunately and unfortunately, will be my last community mobility committee meeting as a member of TrailNet staff. This is my last week at TrailNet. I'm accepting or have accepted a position at WashU in some of their working on some of their climate change programs. So hope to stay involved and engaged as a resident, but just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for all their work. My first meeting with the CMC was the last meeting that we had in person in the late winter, early spring of 2020. So to have seen the growth that we've accomplished and the potential for work that we have to improve safety for folks walking, biking, using transit in the region is really great. So I do have a shameless plug, and that is to help find my replacement. We just posted at TrailNet this week a job posting that would incorporate some of the work I'm doing. So if you know of anyone who might be interested, who has a background in government relations or active transportation or a mixture of both, please pass this along. It's also available on our website. They would get to continue doing this work with the CMC and also a couple other exciting projects that we have coming up, and also working on the local and state level on some of the safety issues and policy work. So please pass and share this far and wide so someone can come and sit in this office that I'm currently sitting in. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you for all the work that you've done in the Traffic Calming Committee, and that you'll stay engaged with the CMC. So to everyone else, thank you so much for this meeting. We have a lot of follow-ups to do, so within the next couple of weeks, we'll be in touch with folks with more information. Our next meeting is 4 weeks from today on May 25th at 1 p.m., also on Zoom. But we hope we'll be able to find some ways to hang out together in person as the weather warms up even more. So take care, have a great afternoon. Thank you all so much.